What is the biggest financial mistake women make in marriage?
There is a tendency to leave financial decisions to their husbands.
What are women entitled to when it comes to divorce?
You will have no rights if you're not married.
What questions would you be wishing every woman asked when they are early in a relationship?
The more they know about the husband's financial situation, the better. When billions are at stake, love tends to last longer. If you want to get the best divorce lawyer, you need to be the first one ringing them. 80% of my clients start by saying, my husband is a narcissist.
What are some of the dirtiest tactics you've ever seen people use?
Welcome to Hot Girl Finance, a podcast where we decode the crazy, sexy world of money, one concept and business at a time. This is maybe one of the most important conversations we've ever recorded, the business of divorce. Save yourself potentially decades of pain and upset and listen to this episode with one of the top divorce lawyers at Vardags in London. Maria Fiorotto reveals how divorce financially works and some of the worst mistakes people make that cost them everything. This could be the difference between being screwed over and not. Send this episode to every girl you know because money isn't just maths, it's freedom.
Maria, I'm so happy you're on Hot Girl Finance because when we first were asking people what conversations do you want to listen to, I would say 90% of people responded saying, I need to know more about the finances of marriage and divorce, especially. Tell us about your day job.
I like to define myself as one of the worst species of lawyers you can come across, the one that you never want to meet in your life. We help people to go through the worst part of their lives, majority of the time. So it's a lot about being psychologist for them as well, not just their lawyer. It's about balancing your duties towards the client, but also being close to them and helping and assisting them through this difficult phase of their life.
What do you think the biggest myth is when it comes to divorce?
Biggest myth is that you have to fight hard to get the most you can. We have a very generous legal system in the UK. You have to fight hard depending on your other side and the approach they're going to take.
What is the biggest financial mistake women make in marriage, in your opinion?
Trust may be a problem because you trust the man you have married and you become completely reliant on them and their choices. Even if you are like a smart professional woman, then there is a tendency to leave all the financial decisions on the husbands. And that's where the marriage starts to break down eventually.
Do you think that's because, in your observation, women are still conditioned to think that finance isn't for them? Because as you said, I'm sure you come across a lot of professional women that have been professionally trained that you wouldn't have expected to have left those decisions to their husband.
Yes, it is more like a cultural, I think, issue. Even if they've studied at university, they've built a career, there is a tendency, and I think it's cultural, the moment you get married, to sort of take a step back and let your husband to lead the family finances.
Under English law, what are women entitled to when it comes to divorce?
As I mentioned, English matrimonial law is very generous, and England is known to be as the capital of divorce. And we see women coming from all over the world to try and establish the jurisdiction in this country to make sure that their divorce are then dealt here before English courts. The main principle is sharing. It comes from a very famous case, which is White and White in 2000, that established that both parties' contribution is important in a marriage, and that really changed the way that divorce was perceived in the past. It means that if you are the homemaker, your contributions are considered to be as equal as the breadwinner's contribution. Basically, everything that is brought into the marriage by the parties, regardless if it's the husband or the wife, then is subject to equal sharing because contributions are the same.
So is that also taking into account, let's say, a woman, and I don't want to be too gendered, but hopefully listeners will give me the grace in this conversation. But let's say a woman takes a break in her career to have kids, when then it comes to divorce, are they looking at it from that lens that women have had to sacrifice, and so they should be seen, preferable in the law's light post that?
Yes, even if they hadn't stepped back from a career, even if you were never into a career and you just devoted your time to family, your husband, taking care of the children, still you're entitled to equal sharing of whatever is matrimonial. If you took a step back in your career because of the marriage, then you can be entitled to something more, even more than an equal sharing, and that's the contribution argument. To be honest, is not very popular, and courts are a bit reluctant in recognizing this extra top-up sharing bit for contribution in that sense. But the starting point, as I said, is that contributions are considered like equal between husbands and wives.
So prior to this White and White famous case, what were the court's approach pre-2020 and how did it change?
There were decisions in the line of White and White, but that was a Supreme Court case. So, of course, had like more impact on the future decisions. So there was already a path going that way. But because there wasn't an established principle, so the outcomes were less generous and wives were awarded less than half as a starting point.
The research I found is that women often face more severe financial consequences post-divorce, especially the year after divorce. How have you seen examples of that?
It could be, but not because of the outcome they got out of the divorce necessarily. If they were never actually used to manage money, to understand how to invest money, then when they receive this chunk of big amount of money at the end of their divorce, most of the time they have no clue as to how to manage these funds and how to invest and how to make like wise decisions for the future. So we as a firm, we try to give that sort of advice to clients as well. Of course, we can't provide like financial advice because we can only provide legal advice, but we put our clients in contact with financial professionals as well that can guide them through the post-divorce phase as well, which is very important.
That's so interesting. And I mean, that's one of the main reasons for this podcast, because there's a lot of women that have access to money, or especially, to your point, in the event of a divorce, and yet because culturally they haven't thought that this was their domain to be educated on, they are potentially leaving hundreds of thousands sitting there without really working for them. So I'm totally in agreement, very passionate about that. So let's talk about a prenup. What is a prenup?
So a prenup is a very helpful tool if it's used wisely and in full acknowledgement of its implication and consequences. Basically, is a way to predetermine the consequences of a future divorce. It can really help the party to save money and acrimony in a future divorce.
Do you find that prenups help avoid divorce becoming complicated?
Of course they do. It's not necessarily the case that if you have a prenup, you don't end up litigating, because we all often see in our day-to-day job that people tend to challenge prenups as well. But the stronger your prenup is, and the better your prenup is drafted, so the more chances you have for that prenup to be upheld and to reduce litigation in the future.
Do you only suggest prenups for people who are dealing with high value assets?
In principle, yes, because the primary aim of a prenup is to ring-fence wealth and assets and making sure that whatever assets you want to protect is not captured in the division of assets during a divorce. But then, because prenup are meant to last for years and for the rest of your married life, then you need to consider how the situation may evolve. And the more you put in your prenup in terms of future scenarios, the better.
Is there any disadvantages to prenups?
For weaker financially party, yes, because if the other side is trying to reduce your entitlement to a 50-50 sharing as a starting point, then you can end up having less than what a court will recognize to you. But on balance, as I said, if you can avoid the acrimony and if you can avoid going through litigation, legal costs, at the end of the day is a win-win, depending, of course, on the circumstances of the prenup. Because the more important thing about a prenup is that it needs to be fair.
What's some of the worst prenups you've ever seen and you can't believe someone signed them?
I've seen many drafted prenuptial agreements, and that's when they get challenged before the courts. It's very important, as I said before, that they are fair. So the weaker financially party must be protected in a way in terms of receiving sufficient capital for their housing needs or income needs. If there are not this sort of protection, then it's quite likely that the courts will reduce the weight attributed to a prenup.
Is it true that if someone emails you out of the couple, it means that the other person in the relationship can't work with you?
Correct, because there may be sort of conflict of interest. So if we are contacted by one of the party, then we can't have conversations with the other.
Do you find that it becomes quite dirty the way that people are playing that? Because if they know they're going to get a divorce, they don't want to tell the other person because they want to contact the best lawyers before the other person knows they're about to have a divorce.
Yes, unfortunately, it happens quite often. So it's more about the sooner the better. If you want to get the best divorce lawyer, you need to be the first one ringing them.
Fascinating. What are the biggest red flags you see in prenups?
Red flags are when there is not full disclosure of assets. That's one of the factors that will be taken into account when waiving the validity of a prenuptial agreement. I want to make sure that we ask all the relevant questions, and I want to make sure that my client is in full knowledge of the actual financial situation.
Have you ever refused to take on a client?
No, it has not happened to me, but there is an obligation as a solicitor to stop acting for a client if there is no trust in your client. So if they refuse to provide, for example, financial information and you are aware that there are assets that have not been disclosed, then you should be stopping acting for that client.
At what point in a relationship do marital rights get triggered even if they are not formally married?
They don't. That's the simple answer. If you're not married, you have no financial rights. And that's a very important thing for women to understand, because there is this sort of misconception about, well, we've been living together for 20 years, 30 years, we have a child together, we built everything together. So I will be, even if we are not married, I would be entitled at least to something. No, you will have no rights if you're not married. So it's very important to make wise decision as to getting married or not getting married.
I'm really shocked about that. For some reason, I thought that this is my ignorance, I even do this show and I'm so ignorant when it comes to matters like this, because there must be a terrible rumor that says the opposite or something. After 7 years, the court treats you like a marital partner, which is clearly a huge myth.
There have been many calls about changing the law and having a law for cohabitants and providing some sort of financial relief to partners, especially after long relationships, but there's nothing like that yet. You can get some sort of financial relief if you have a child, because you can apply for a Schedule 1 application, and as part of the application, part of the mother needs are also covered, but it's nothing compared to what you can get if you are married.
Wow, very interesting. Obviously, prenups are very unromantic because you're talking about a breakup before you've even, had a joyous day. How do you encourage people to approach the conversation in the most unconflicty way?
Well, it's not an easy conversation, and it comes like all the time in conversation when I have a new prenup case is if I represent the stronger financial party and they're like, how am I going to ask my future wife to sign a prenuptial agreement? She won't like that. true, she may not like it, but I think it's important to understand that having a prenuptial agreement is about having clear rules for your future in case things do not go well. And clarity is always key and the essence of a long marriage.
Clarity is always key. What a lovely sentiment. So when it comes to inheritance, this is obviously probably quite a tricky area because many people might inherit small or big assets from different generations. Does that automatically mean that they have to be shared?
Inherited assets are considered non-matrimonial assets as a starting point. However, in some circumstances, the court can also look at inherited assets if the other matrimonial resources are not sufficient to cover the weaker financially party needs. And this is one of the major reasons why people want to have prenuptial agreement, because prenuptial agreement can ring-fence those assets. So if you already inherited assets and you want to make sure that they will not end up into the matrimonial pot in a few years' time, or if you are about to receive inheritance and you want to make sure that that will be ring-fenced, prenuptial agreements are a very helpful tool in that sense.
And I know it's difficult to probably share exact numbers, but how much roughly does it cost to create a prenuptial agreement?
It really depends on the assets that are at stake, because you need to have full understanding of, especially if there are like companies, trusts most of the time. So we, in our firm, also have like a financial forensic department that can dig into these companies and provide like a general understanding of their values and dynamics. So they can be costly if there are no much assets and it's just about splitting whatever is now or you're expecting to receive in the future. They may be, of course, cheaper. But my advice would be, even if you are going to pay a little bit more now, you are saving money in the future, because as I said before, a badly drafted prenuptial agreement may become a problem and you end up spending more money challenging that in court or resisting a challenge from the other side.
Let me give you an example and ask you how you would approach this. So let's say I am a professional woman. I have bought a house. I'm mid-30s and I've met someone who earns less than me and we're going to get married. Now, would that property that I bought when I was single automatically become half theirs on marriage?
The answer really depends on the use of that property. If that property becomes the family home enjoys a special status because it's normally considered as being matrimonial, regardless as to who bought that property into the marriage. So if you and your partner live there, or husband live there, and you have a child and you spend years in that property, there may be arguments to say that's matrimonial, needs to be split equally.
But if it was an asset you didn't live in, but rented out, but it was done far before you even were dating, that only a prenup would be able to ring fence that potentially and protect the asset.
Correct. Is as a starting point, that would be considered a non-matrimonial asset. But if other resources available for division would not be sufficient, then the court may consider that as an asset available for division, and in an event will be considered an asset available to the wife in your example.
Okay, so my second example is that I am a woman and we've had children and I earn more than my partner and I do more childcare as well. In event of a divorce, how would the courts view that if I am doing more of the childcare and earning more? Would I have to provide support for my husband that was earning less and doing less childcare?
I would say no, but it depends on what contribution the husband is given, because it's not just about childcare really in a marriage. That plays an important role, but there are other things that you would do as contribution towards the marriage. For example, the husband supported the wife's career and assisted her or took care of the household management and whatever help and support he gave in the marriage, that would be consider as well as part of all the factors that the courts will take into account.
Very, very interesting.
But I would like to see more women being like leading the family finances and having time to take care of the children. I struggle myself, so
Right.
to do both.
And you're not seeing so many examples of that in your practice.
Not unfortunately.
Interesting. Are you seeing more in general of men trying to restrict women from having access to finances post-divorce? Would you say it's more the other way than women trying to fight for their right to keep on to the things they've earned?
It depends, of course, but women tend to be more dedicated to family and children, and it's like a joint decision, taking a step back at some point in their career, depending on number of children, for example. Because of the cost of childcare nowadays, it's quite common for the husband to be the one that drives finances and the wife that takes care of the family.
So this moves us into financial control in relationships, because I'm sure that you have seen many examples and heard of many examples of, in an event of a divorce, a lot of the relationship is exposed and you are observing women being controlled by money. How common is that?
That's unfortunately quite common. When you marry, you trust the other person, you become reliant on them, and then at some point you stop looking into the finances, and especially if there's money and you don't have to worry about facing the day-to-day struggles or how am I going to pay the bill, then you tend to forget about money. You just live your life. But then when divorce happens, then you find yourself in a situation where you have no clue as to what's there or what is left, and how the family finances are structured. And that's where women are the vulnerable at most.
What are some signs of financial abuse, would you say, to look out for?
It starts from very little things. For example, not having access to accounts, having to beg money for paying family expenses, or having availability of a credit card but with a very tight spending limit. All stuff like that are red flags.
And do you find that in those examples, when it's come to divorce, do you find that the divorces are often harder?
They are, because there is one important stage in divorce is computation, and as part of the computation you need to have clarity as to what's there. So when I meet a client that sits in front of me and you ask the question, okay, tell me more about your finances, do you own property? And they look at you like, no idea, maybe the family home, how many you have on family accounts, I have no idea. So it happens very, very often, and then we help and assist them in gathering all the necessary information, and of course there is a duty of the other side to provide the information as part of the court process, but things start to get very difficult if they are reluctant to provide information.
I can imagine it must be quite an emotional job as well.
It is.
You know, just to sit with some of these women that have potentially been subtly abused for years and, only, I guess, get their freedom maybe decades later.
Just this morning I was in a call with a client and she was desperate because what the husband offered her on an informal basis was nothing, and he's a big entrepreneur, many companies all over the world, and he keeps saying to her, I have nothing, I'm not going to provide you with any information, you have to trust me. And she burst out in crying, and she's desperate. So I had a very difficult conversation with her just this morning.
What questions would you be wishing every woman asked when they are early in a relationship?
It's important that both parties are on the same foot in terms of where do we want to go with our marriage, and transparency, I think, is extremely important. You want to make sure that whatever happens in the future, you have visibility and understanding as to what your husband's salary, bonuses are, what resources there will be in the marriage, and having clear and frank conversation from the very beginning. It's really helpful.
I read once that 1 in 4 women don't leave relationships because they don't feel they can afford to.
Correct. But there are tools and that we as a lawyer can help you so you can get the sort of financial relief in the interim. If the wealthier party refuses to pay for your legal costs, then you can apply with the court, asking the court to make an order that the husband pays for your solicitor's costs, because there is a principle of equality of arms. So if your husband goes to the best divorce lawyer, you have the same right to secure the same high-level advice and representation. And English law is one of the few that have this very helpful tool.
That's very positive. So obviously you spend a lot of time working with ultra high net worth individuals. What's the most common misconception about wealthy divorces?
One misconception is that everything is 50-50 regardless, and whoever is the wealthier party trying to reduce that 50%, not even thinking that in reality they could be asked to give more than 50%, especially if they maintain the earning capacity and will continue to make money in the future. Whereas women that have never been in a career, they need to rely on the share that we receive from the divorce. So they may end up receiving more actually than husbands.
Okay, because the courts have taken into account that they may have another 25 years of earning what they were, and obviously for their partner, that's not the case.
Correct.
Am I right in thinking that post-divorce, the weaker party's lifestyle has to remain consistent to what it was when they were in the relationship?
Yes, because standard of living is a very important factor that the courts will take into account, as long as continue to be affordable, of course, in the circumstances.
When billions are at stake, does love disappear faster?
When billions are at stake, I would say love tends to last longer, because the longer you stay in a marriage, the more you can get out of it. Shorter marriage take less.
That's so funny. Divorces inherently are very emotional. Do people make stupid emotional decisions when obviously you're a lawyer and you're trained to be helping people avoid that?
So that's a very good point. And actually emotions are the drive that make people make those mistakes. And I can see two ends driven by emotion. From one hand, a big mistake is allowing revenge and hunger to take the lead over legal strategy, and you end up like in acrimonious litigation and spending a lot of money on legal fees, reducing actually what remains available for division. So that's one mistake. The other mistake, also driven by emotion, is wanting to reach a settlement at whatever cost as soon as possible, because you can't afford the fatigue of the emotion, and you end up with settlements that are not fair and that do not protect yourself for the future.
So do you tell people this is an emotional marathon?
Yes. And that's why I also think having psychological support and therapists that help you along this journey, it's also very important.
What documents do you think every woman should know about when it comes to money and marriage?
Well, the more they know about the husband's financial situation, the better. Not because they have to provide the information, because it's the husband's duty, but it's more about having the ability to question their disclosure. If you knew, for example, that they own some property and it's not there in their disclosure, it's important that you flag that with your solicitor so we can ask the relevant questions and bring that before the court's attention. But in general, I would not recommend wives to go and dig into the husband's files. One, because it's illegal, so you can't really do that. And even if you got the documents, we can't really use them in court proceedings. It's more about understanding how your finances are structured, how things, bills, the day-to-day life expenses are paid from, if you know if there are savings. So the more information you have, the better.
That's a really interesting point. So let's say someone finds a document because they have been searching through someone's office. If they have not found it through transparent means, you cannot use that piece of evidence in court.
Correct. Unless you found that document on the kitchen counter in the morning and was left there and was open and was available to you, you can't really open correspondence, the husband's correspondence, or dig into his file and extrapolating documents.
Wow, that's so interesting.
It is. And that's one of the things that people normally don't know. And they come to us with like huge files. I was digging into my husband's closet and I found this. Or like, okay, we can't use that. Please return it to him. They will have to provide the information. So it's not for you having to find the information.
How does affairs affect marriage and divorce settlements?
They don't do anymore. It made a difference in the past when there was not the no-fault divorce, and it was important to understand what the reason of the breakdown of the marriage was. And having an affair was one of those factors that were considered by the court, not in terms of finances, but in terms of divorce. You had to inform the court as to the reasons why your marriage ended up.
Can someone's will change what has already been agreed in a prenup?
It can. There is some interaction between a prenuptial agreement and a will, and that's why we always recommend when someone enters into a prenuptial agreement to also make sure that the provision in the will are aligned with the prenuptial provisions.
How different is marital law in America to the UK to Europe?
They are different. One peculiarity of matrimonial law is that it really is like domestic law, so it depends on the state. So the matrimonial law in Florida can be very different from the one of the New York state. It's more similar to the UK on certain aspects because it's still like common law, and it can be very different from European civil law countries. So my advice is whenever you have connections with any foreign country, it's very important to get legal advice in that specific country so you can understand whether a divorce can proceed in another jurisdiction and what kind of outcome you can get there.
Where do you think is the worst place in the world to get divorced?
East European countries, unfortunately, or Dubai or Saudi Arabia or African states. Basically all the states where women are not recognized any value or rights.
The inequality between men and women, has it made you more of a feminist, this job?
Of course, yeah. That's one of the consequences of being a divorce lawyer.
A lot of people might think that men and women are more equal than they've ever been. Do you think that, or do you think we've still got quite a way to go?
We still quite a way to go. It's getting, of course, better. There's more awareness at the moment. Like talks like this are really like super helpful tool for women. Young generations have like a different approach to these issues. It wasn't like that in the past. What I see is that people coming from foreign countries still suffer from this sort of misconception and imbalance between man and wife. And even if they've been living in this country for a long time, they still carry with them their cultural barriers, in a sense, in the way they perceive marriage, in the way they perceive their relationship with the husband.
Do you witness a lot of women almost internalize the misogyny that the culture potentially has, and they actually don't believe they are entitled to half?
Yes, and there's also a sort of shame to ask questions, a shame to ask whatever you are entitled to. And we often fight with these women that assisted their husband to build like huge wealth in the marriage, and then they think they've done nothing apart from growing up and bringing up their children. And it's very difficult to let them understand and appreciating that their contribution is as equal as their husband's. And they would be just happy to accept the minimal they can get out of the marriage.
It's absolutely appalling and devastating. How much does children impact divorce settlements?
At times, children are used as a sort of leverage or a weapon, I would say, to get more. The good thing is that children proceedings are completely independent from financial proceedings. So the judge that is dealing with finances is not involved in whatever is going on the children case. It means that they can maintain a sort of independent, neutral approach. It happens in negotiations between the parties, but professionals tend to keep things separate so to avoid that they can actually be used as a weapon.
What are some of the dirtiest tactics you've ever seen people use when it comes to divorce?
Hiding assets. Unfortunately, that's quite commonplace, but that's very common. Trying to sell assets or having assets registered in third parties' names, putting assets under trusts or companies, offshore companies, making things more complicated for the weaker financially party.
Have you ever found people go to lengths where they're trying to frame their partner as a bad parent? So it means that they don't have the same amount of custody, and so it means they can give them less in terms of child support and stuff like that.
Yes, unfortunately, a lot of lies are constantly told every day about the other parents' behaviors, and it's sad because at the end of the day are the children that suffer most of this situation.
How do you know when someone's lying? Because I imagine you've got really good at it.
It's not straightforward because there is a tendency to trust your client, but then when you put together some pieces of the jigsaw together, then you understand they are lying. You need to have that full and frank conversation with them. At the end of the day, we as solicitors, we are officers of the court, so our primary duty is towards the court, and we need to bring the truth.
What does it mean to go to court or settle out of court? What's the process that takes it to court, and how can people avoid court?
Normally, all lawyers tend to avoid court if they can. So it's also as part of our duties to make sure that you try non-court dispute resolution methods. Can be mediation, can be arbitration. There are lots of ways. One thing that I see works quite well in my experience are, for example, roundtable meetings with the other side. But still, even if you are outside of the court route, it's important to follow certain stages, because there is a misconception normally that if you settle out of court, you don't have to provide disclosure. That's not the case. You still have to provide disclosure. You still need to have the opportunity to ask questions and to instruct experts and to do all the things that you would do as part of the court process. It will take less, it will be probably quicker and cheaper. So that's why it's a very good opportunity to try and settle your case out of the court. But then if you have another side that is not providing disclosure, is not having proper behaviors, they're not conducting the case in the way you would expect, or is causing delays, then there's no point in insisting in out-of-court settlement. Then you need to have the protection of the court in terms of having set deadlines, and then if you do not comply, then you will be in breach of court orders with all the consequences.
Would you say that you are exposed to more narcissists than not because you're dealing with high net worth individuals?
That's an interesting question. I should say that 80% of my clients, they sit in front of me and they start by saying, well, my husband is a narcissist. And I hear this all the time. And they provide very detailed description of their narcissist behaviors because they've been digging on the internet, or they provide you with books about that. And actually, most of the time, it is true. And I can see a sort of pattern that it's the same in terms of even the way they conduct their litigation. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really make a huge difference because the protection of the legal system is out there and is more about for the clients in these circumstances getting the right support and having the right tools to challenge those behaviors and liaise with his husband. And yeah,
Even a narcissist can't charm the courts.
no, they can't. I think judges are very used to deal with narcissists, and because they see them all the time, so they're not much influenced by them. As I say, there's a very similar pattern. If you do this job, you will easily recognize that.
To finish off, we have a section called Save or Splurge.
Great, let's go.
Prenups.
Splurge.
Private investigator.
Save.
Top tier barrister.
Splurge.
Therapy during divorce.
Splurge.
Luxury office space.
Splurge. It's important as well.
High-end branding.
Save.
Aggressive litigation.
Save.
Out-of-court settlement.
Splurge.
Personal security.
Splurge.
If every woman listening could leave one thing knowing more about marriage and money, what would that be?
Money surely helps marriage to last longer, but then at the same time, if you are not in control as a couple of the family resources, then that can be the start of the marriage breakdown.
Thank you so much. This episode has been absolutely fascinating. I have learned so much, and I realize how many myths I held about this subject. So you've educated me in a way that I didn't even know I needed to be educated. That was mind-blowing. So thank you so much for hopefully helping and supporting people if they're thinking about this, or giving a lot of confidence to help people make different decisions now to avoid potentially a very difficult divorce. So huge gratitude from us. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Want more tips on the crazy, sexy world of money? Subscribe to stay connected, send it to your friends, and rate the show to help more women find us. We need to empower everyone we know because this is a group effort. Hot Girl Finance is now on all podcast platforms, Instagram and YouTube. Send us a DM for any topics and guest suggestions you'd like us to cover. See you soon. Until next time, stay hot and look after your finances.